Hi, welcome everybody to the presentation from Disabled Sports USA and our Warfighter Sports program. We're going to be talking today to share with you some of our program best practices that we've learned through working with disabled veterans. So we want to welcome everybody to Path International Equine Services for Heroes virtual conference. We're really proud to be a partner with Path International for this. My name is Julia Ray. I am the Programs Director for Disabled Sports USA, and I have been with the organization for 15 years, including helping start up our Disabled Veteran Program right around 2003. And I'll share with you a little bit more background about our organization and the program in just a second.
And my name is Julianne Mills. I'm a Program Manager here at Disabled Sports USA for our training and education initiative, which is called Adapt to Achieve. Adapt to Achieve was established in 2009 to promote training and professional education, primarily for our chapter network, but also the adaptive sports industry as a whole.
Thanks. So Disabled Sports USA is an organization that was founded in 1967, and the Adapt to Achieve and the Warfighter Sports program really work hand in glove together because we really feel like we can share some programmatic tools, guidelines, and practical tips on how to work with disabled veterans. What we're going to be talking about today is, as well as who we are, we're going to talk a little bit about challenges facing our veterans. We're going to give some programming tips, some of the things we've learned in our time in working with disabled veterans, some outreach and communication best practices, as well as some practical resources and tools we hope that you guys can take away and will be useful to implement in your programs and help serve veterans even better than you do already. So as I mentioned, DSUSA has been around for over 50 years. If you haven't heard of us, we are one of the nation's largest multi-sport, multi-disability organizations. We offer community-based sports and recreation to youth and adults in more than 50 summer and winter sports, with 128 community-based chapters in 42 states, of which quite a few offer equine programs. So some of them may also be Path International members. So there's quite a lot of crossover within our chapter network and with Path International. As an organization, we serve over 60,000 individuals with disabilities annually. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how many of those are veterans. We are a community-based member of the United States Olympic Committee, and we're very proud of having various awards as far as best practices with Guide Star and a Gold Seal Best in America charity. We thought to kick things off, we'd show you a brief video. I'll talk a little bit after the video about what key messages I want to highlight and program best practices that we'll hear more about later, but thought it would be a great introduction to who we are and what we do at DSUSA.
For 50 years, Disabled Sports USA has been there for our severely wounded warfighters. For every wounded warfighter we have served, there is a day, a time, and a place that they will never forget. For Army Captain Matthew Staten, that day was January 29th, 2004.
I was in an ambush position in Balad, Iraq, and myself and another soldier went out to support one soldier, and I ended up taking 6 bullets. First round entered my left thigh, just below the plate, and 4 or 5 more across the chest into the plate.
Matt was not only shot multiple times, but suffered traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress from multiple IED explosions. Invisible, isolating injuries with severe symptoms. Like so many wounded, Matt thought the best part of his life could be over.
I played football, I wrestled, I ran track, and I had an extensive outdoor environment from fishing, canoeing, hiking, etc. And to have all that and then go through a catastrophic injury, it demoralizes you to a point that you find yourself going, where do I go from here? What can I do?
Matt struggled with these questions for several years after his injury. Then he connected with Disabled Sports USA.
I decided to get in touch with them because I knew I needed to get back to a core base of what I grew up with, and that was outdoor activities. And then have had multiple outings and events over my life here for the last 5-6 years. And that includes skiing, golf, scuba diving. I've been able to find new hobbies that I actually never did prior to injury.
Sports ignited Matt's will to live and inspired him to give back. As a certified ski and scuba instructor, Matt is now helping many other wounded warfighters rebuild their lives through sports. Today, Matt serves his country as a civilian staff assistant for the Secretary of the Army.
To be able to show my peers that I have had a catastrophic injury, but there are things in your life that you can do and integrate in your life to be able to have a different outlook on life, but do it through sports, do it through something that you can not only get yourself out there, but get your family out there as well.
With support from his wife Jennifer and his daughter Samantha, Matt has rediscovered the power of sports and is now fighting to make life better for other wounded soldiers.
They gave me that drive again. They gave me that ability by that example to say, hey, you can learn to play golf. We've helped you with your scuba diving. We can help and show you that you can give back to your community, and not only give back, but be an integral part and show others that, so what, you have a disability. Be known for your abilities.
So what you saw there through Matt's story was a really fantastic example of where a veteran can take an entry-level program and really take it to the next level. So he's gone on to give back to his community, to other disabled veterans and other people with disabilities, youth and adults too, through taking his certifications as an instructor, both in alpine skiing and in scuba. So we thought that was a really good example, and we will get into a little bit about program design later, where we can talk about why or how you can set veterans up for success and why that is important with this specific population. So to go back to the program, Warfighter Sports does serve veterans, as we've mentioned, and active members of the armed forces with severe disabilities. It's been operating in its current format since 2003. Although our history as an organization is that we were founded by the 10th Mountain Division in 1967. So we have a rich history with veterans throughout our lifespan, and from going as an organization that was designed by World War II veterans to help Vietnam veterans. In 2003, we stood up this new program to help the current generation. And since then, we've served over 12,000 veterans and their families across the country. A key component is that we offer these programs free of cost. That doesn't necessarily mean that we fly or cover travel to any program anywhere in the country for any veteran. It just means that the actual programming costs are always free. That is, a veteran isn't charged for adaptive equipment or the instruction. Quite often, a lot of programs under the Warfighter Sports calendar do help with additional aspects of costs to get to the program, to offer meals and potentially lodging, depending on the nature and the length of the program. That's a decision the local entity usually makes. And Disabled Sports USA offers quite a significant series of grants to support those costs, including veterans in the programming. Collectively, the program offers over 100 events annually through 2 calendars. We distribute one in the winter and one in the summer that are published online. A little bit about the population that we serve, and these are our qualifying criteria. We have been quite thoughtful about trying to make this as least restrictive as possible. So we serve veterans no matter what era they were injured, whether they were injured in combat or non-combat. And we do not require a DD-214 proof of disability. We just simply ask whether they need adaptive teaching or equipment, and that is self-disclosed. There is, of course, the pros and cons of that method are that there are some who may not need our services and use it. Then we choose to just accept that percentage as part of our programming model, and that's something that we're completely fine with. The downside to requiring more paperwork to get into a program, that can be obviously a barrier. So that can be something that can deter some veterans from participating, either because for privacy concerns they don't want to share it. So that's something that we have chosen to, that's why we've chosen to go that route. That being said, there are definitely programs that do need that requirement and that have different objectives. So that's something on a case-by-case your program will need to consider. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges facing our veterans today. And many of you will already be aware of this data out there, and that a lot of veterans have had problems reintegrating into their communities, taking care of their own health, becoming employed. And that is important to recognize, because sport and recreation has been shown to make veterans twice as likely to become employed. It really does help veterans transition back into the workforce, as well as all other aspects of their lives. And there's a lot of good data out there to support that. One area you can start is actually through the Disabled Sports USA website. We have results publicly on the About Us section of our website that talk about a survey that we did in 2008 that does show veterans more likely to be employed who are active and participate in some of our chapter programming. So that's interesting stats that your program can make use of as you're applying for grants or talking to stakeholders about the effectiveness of your programming and why it's important to our veterans, and sports and recreation is important in their lives. So those are some tools that I would recommend you look at. Shown on the right-hand side of the screen is a sports resource guidebook that we have published free of cost for veterans, and it lists out approximately 45 national organizations, as well as over 200 community organizations nationally. They may or may not be members of our organization. That isn't important. The purpose was for us to provide something that was as comprehensive as possible of programs that were actively offering free or low-cost adaptive sports programming for veterans. So that's something we've put together in partnership with the VA, and that we distribute at expos when we go into VA hospitals or DoD facilities, so that veterans can become aware of what is happening in their community. And as many of you are aware, the VA has been investing $10 million a year for the last 8 years into adaptive sports programming, which has really made a huge difference in the availability of these important resources in veterans' lives. So now I really want to get into some of the kind of key practical tips that we wanted to share with you today. And one of the places I'm going to start is when you're working with VA and DoD facilities. First of all, how to find good contacts in those systems. The challenge often is there's a lot of transition with staff and turnover. So you're always building new connections and reaching out and trying to keep those alive. So start by, the VA website is pretty good as far as listing out facilities and contacts. And so find the hospitals in your VISN, in your network and your area. There are over 1,900 nationwide. So use the website to find a contact near you. And there's plenty of resources there. The polytrauma sites, there are approximately 5 around the country, are the ones which are the larger facilities that have focused on treating those with more severe brain injury and polytrauma. So if you have one in your vicinity, they're definitely a group that is worth reaching out to. I know that includes Tampa, Palo Alto, and Minneapolis, for example. On the DoD side of things, the Warrior Transition Units have been downsizing and closing due to BRAC, base realignment and closure. So there are still around a dozen still open. And I would contact look at the DoD or the Army website. You can actually, if you Google Warrior Transition Unit contacts, there's actually full phone numbers and emails listed there. So it's a good way to reach them. So then when you get into the practical tips for working with VA and military facilities, I would say some things that we have learned is obviously to listen and really hear what they want from a program and really hear what their population of veterans are asking for. So ask those questions up front from your contacts so that they really know that you're there to meet their needs and not just to push on a certain program type that you're familiar with. So really see how you can meet in the middle and match what you have to offer with what they're looking for. We have found, and this goes again to the least restrictive qualifying criteria I mentioned earlier, that often if you're in their shoes, they don't often want to be turning a lot of veterans away because they don't meet certain criteria. So if you can be as open as possible to who can come to your program, that definitely helps a therapist or your contact person because they're on that front line of telling veterans whether they do or do not qualify. So that's something that really can help them. When you are working with them to talk about why what you do is important, really emphasize your training, your experience, the qualification, and the detailed standards that you have in place to ensure the veteran is going to have a positive experience. So lean on your history as an organization to prove that you have all of your experience and that the veteran is going to come in first time and really have a positive sports lesson. It's going to be really important to address those concerns that the VA has around liability, emphasize that you do have insurance coverage and those kind of things, because they can often be what's in the back of their minds with concerns, even if they don't bring it up on the front end. As an introduction, I would think about whether or not you can come in to participate in some kind of expo or resource fair just to show what you do. Think about whether or not there are things you can do on site to meet veterans directly and teach them about your program, address any fears or concerns people have on before they even get to your facility, because maybe even getting there could be a big concern or barrier for some people. So getting to know you personally can really help. Offering a variety of types of service, and we'll get into some of the models momentarily, but really talking about the different challenges you can set veterans to make sure this isn't just a one-time thing, that you have a progressive program could be something that really will stand you out in the crowd when you're trying to convince a facility to work with you officially. And of course, the health and wellness benefits go without saying, and hopefully you're working with somebody who appreciates that from the start. When you're working with individual veterans and promoting your program, there's a little bit of a different approach, and that is really focusing it on each individual and really listening to them and what they want to get from your program. So in a sense, the listening aspect does run the same. You're trying to understand veterans in your community and what they want to get from your program. And really do focus on the individuals. I'll encourage everybody to not really focus too much on numbers, on trying to get through the door 20 at a time. If you have one veteran coming to your program one day, that's a huge success, and your reputation will build from there. Veterans are going to talk to other veterans, and if they have a good experience, they'll bring their friends. So building that slowly and having patience is a key thing that we've learned. Before you really start anything, of course, ask. When you speak to your partners, other veteran service organizations in the area, they'll obviously be a wealth of information about what veterans are looking for, what they've told them, what kinds of activities and styles of programming they've seen that they really respond to. And if you start a program for veterans and don't have consistent turnout or large-scale turnout right at the start, I would just also add that the most successful programs in our experience have really been consistent and kept it going. So they haven't been turned off by having some weeks where literally no one shows up. They'll be there. And if veterans in your community know that you're reliable and will always be there for them and have that available service, eventually that, again, word will get around and they'll start coming. We'll talk about progression in a little while and keeping it interesting. Certainly veterans are very service oriented, as if we're going to make a generalization, that's a very positive thing about the population. They have served for their country already. So how can we channel that interest and that desire into our programming? What other aspects do you have that you can offer at your center to keep it interesting, and give them some goals and what the potential could be from participating in your program, not necessarily just promoting what the first entry point opportunity is, really kind of make it very interesting as far as what the future might hold. And maybe a camp might be a way to start that off, or, just starting with your ongoing weekly programming, but doing some kind of expos or demo days might get the interest started. And really do keep the feedback and evaluation process consistent and ongoing. Make that something that's happening all the time and never stops, so that you can keep it fresh and interesting through the lifetime of the program.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about different approaches to your program model. The first step will be deciding what works for your program. You'll be evaluating what resources you have available, what the goals are for your program, and perhaps the philosophy of your organization to determine whether or not it makes sense to pursue any of the models that we mentioned today. And there's two ways you can do this. You have your existing program that you can work to fit veterans in who are suitable, or you may be able to tailor programs to meet the needs of individual veterans. One of the ways that you can help encourage participation ongoing is by including family members and friends of the veterans. So this is a way that you're creating an environment that they are learning their horseback riding skills alongside of loved ones, people they want to spend time with, maybe more time with, and their family and friends will also benefit from the skills that they learn at your facility. You may also offer private lessons or individual appointments. These could be on a regular weekly schedule, or perhaps with more flexibility, you may have more success in having them attend regularly as their schedule allows. For many individuals, they could be juggling different types of appointments and travel, so a regular time can be difficult to establish. And we have an example that Julia is going to share about snow sports lessons with one of our chapters in Virginia.
Sure. Our chapter, Two Top Mountain Adaptive Sports, they also participate with the VA, fantastic program, identified through a partnership with Walter Reed National Military Medical Center that these appointments and the different timing of those was really standing in the way of many veterans getting into the sports lessons. So they really made their whole model of complete flexibility, and that is allowing the veteran to schedule a lesson alongside a family member or a friend. They could both come together and take a lesson at the mountain at a time that worked for them. So they didn't try to bring them all as a group necessarily at all. It was completely the opposite. And that has been hugely successful for them and has gained a lot of good feedback and a positive reputation from that hospital because of their flexibility. So just one idea to share.
Thank you. And group lessons come with a number of benefits. Being able to have the social benefits of working alongside other veterans, also being able to schedule volunteers in groups has social and learning benefits for them as well. And groups can be tailored to target specific populations. So whether you want to have people of the same age or similar skill level, disability type, those are different approaches that you can take towards structuring your group lessons. Also, with the goals of the services you're providing, it may not be just straight riding skills. There could be different things that you can incorporate related to horsemanship and riding. Everyone loves to be out on the trail or ride in the open, so that is a great goal to work towards, especially if you are in an area where you can trailer your horses off-site and pursue different trails, different environments. That helps to keep things fresh and explore new territory. And you want to be sensitive not to emphasize the therapeutic aspect of the activity too much. That can be a deterrent for some, but rather if you are offering a horsemanship or horseback riding experience, that is a draw in itself. And the benefits that we get physically and mentally are secondary and a nice bonus. Also, we've talked about progression, and one of the ways that a veteran may progress is to pursue volunteering with the organization if you have those opportunities available. I think the video that we showed of Matt earlier about his personal progression and becoming an instructor himself is a great example of a success story on that front. And with transitioning a participant to become a volunteer, you want to be sure that you're communicating with them clearly about what volunteering entails. So do an evaluation of your volunteer program to make sure that you're equipped to have participants become volunteers. They will benefit greatly from the training that you provide, the social opportunities they have, and the ability to give back and serve their community. Another way that you can help ensure their long-term volunteer service is to communicate with them regularly to make sure that it's a good fit for them. And then, as we mentioned on a previous slide, helping with different logistics if possible, like transportation or meals, that can all help to make volunteering a smoother experience. And we also wanted to talk about keeping programs low-key, especially at first. Oftentimes there's great interest both from your barn and your volunteers, as well as the community and perhaps media, when they learn that you are providing this great service to the community. Volunteers may be very excited for the opportunity to support a veterans program. However, just be sure to be mindful about how many volunteers you're scheduling at a time, how much support each rider may or may not need, with an emphasis on encouraging them to be as independent as possible and limit distractions to the program. And we have an example of an event that attracts a quite a bit of attention out in Colorado every year. And Julia is going to talk a little bit about how we help to manage that program and serving veterans for snow sports.
Yeah, and it can apply to any sport or activity, and that is that we get a lot of requests for interviews or people with cameras or the media wanting to talk to veterans about their experiences, which is all positive. The messages that, often people are happy to do, but we do want to make sure that, first of all, the sports experience comes first and foremost, and that anything that happens with regards to interviews or photography doesn't get in the way. So it's just something important to think about. So definitely that first day out isn't probably a great time to introduce a lot of external activity like that, or having a huge number of volunteers working with one veteran, single veteran at once. So just really thinking about their experience, and it goes across all of these points in really putting yourself in somebody's shoes about how they're feeling being there, and they don't want to sort of be in a fishbowl with a lot of people looking as they try horse riding for the first time. It can be quite daunting. So just really being mindful of what that experience might feel like to the user would be our recommendation.
And so just to recap our overview here of program models, just a few takeaways. Deciding what your approach is really key, and seeing what they want to get out of their riding. Are they seeking a leisure, recreational activity? Do they want to pursue competition or do something that involves more athleticism? Those are all things that you can help that will help guide which direction to go with your programming models, as well as timing. Is your program short term? Is it a destination, a retreat, or a camp? Or are you looking at something more long term, ongoing commitment to learning more about horsemanship and horseback riding? So we don't want to go too much further into different ideas. We want to leave some room for discussion for you all to share during the Q&A portion that will follow the slides here. And we welcome any feedback and questions you may have during that.
And I'm going to now talk a little bit about how to help draw in your population to your programming. You may have seen on the previous slide, we had borrowed a picture which we really liked from Heroes and Horses, and that was something I felt really did evoke. It was an image that evoked something very rugged, and even though that might not be exactly what your program offers, the imagery and the choices of what you put forward, you should try and reflect what veterans might find attractive about the program. So like Julianne mentioned earlier, not necessarily, even if it is therapy-based, is that what's going to get them through the door? The results and the process and the therapeutic nature of the activity could be a secondary thing that is explained as a benefit once they're at your program. So I would just say keep your marketing pretty straightforward and simple, and really, like all of us, when we are choosing how to spend our time, we're going to be drawn to programming where the imagery and the message depicts something we want to be, or we ultimately want to have the skills to do. So it's no different really to a lot of other clients that you serve. In addition to kind of some of those practical tips, I want to talk about how to find veterans. That's something we hear a lot about, recruitment challenges and where to go to target that audience. And I would just add that in addition to the VA and the military facilities that we mentioned earlier, and really trying to network and get into those medical centers to consider partnerships with other veteran service organizations. That might be PVA chapters, American Legion, Disabled American Veteran chapters, and other organizations with a parallel interest and mission to your own. And also to reach out and establish that partnership prior to when you need something. So not reaching out and saying, can you push this flyer out for me or tell people about my program, but maybe having that meeting or that call in the beginning and working out what your quid pro quo is going to be. So really establishing, here's how we can help each other to serve disabled veterans and our target population better. So just would encourage that. Paralympic sport clubs, Disabled Sports USA chapters, all of them can be found in your communities and really are good partners so that you can share services and reach the veterans in your community. So those are some ideas. So when you're putting together your marketing tools, I've chosen another one here that I thought was a really nice image. It was simple, attractive, use images that look like the client you're trying to reach. So all too often we'll see if you have a picture of a child with a disability that's writing on your flyer, that's not going to look like the client you're trying to reach. So try and mirror that in terms of making them feel like you're really serving their needs. Or if it's a program for people who have a spinal cord injury, make sure that your material reflects that in its imagery and language as well, so that it's really clear who your program is for. Because we all can't imagine being in the situation where you might have some physical challenges and you're not sure if your program can meet them. So you want to be really visual and clear that of what you can and can't do. It's never a good idea to say that all are welcome or anyone can come. If you do have restrictions on size, height, weight, whatever it may be, that's all fine, but make sure everything is upfront about that. And thinking about, there are lots of different types of equine assisted activities and therapies. So just really when you're thinking about what to market and put out there, make sure you capitalize on what your strengths are as a program, and also think about the words that you use in that too, and use adjectives that maybe the armed services and veterans value and espouse. We've thought of some before that I have a few here: freedom, fighting service, fearless, brave, strength, victory, endurance, and you name it. You can come up with many more positive descriptors for that population. But really, I noticed in the equine community, there's a lot of hearts, warmth, joy kind of language. Is that way up? Whether that's the heartwarming, softer sell is what's going to meet this population where they're at. So making it about challenge, we have found some success with that. And also, as Julianne mentioned about earlier as well, and how we've touched on, is focusing on fun, athleticism, service, and what the next phase of this is going to be as well, is going to be something that might be more interesting to this particular population. Another way to reach veterans as well is just make sure you're listing everything on online calendars and message boards that are out there. For example, again, Disabled Sports USA's event listing, anybody can add an event that's free of cost for veterans and others with disabilities on there as well. So that's a good resource to know. And we just wanted to kind of give you an example of a flyer that we pushed out recently for Surf Camp in Virginia Beach. And the attributes of this that I did want to point out is that we have some key information, but really try and distill it to the real key pieces of information that someone might need to know to entice them to come to the program. So using an image of a disabled veteran surfing who has some significant challenges, but showing that it's what is possible and that he can still surf successfully. It's fun, it's athletic, pushing limits. Those are things that we've tried to put in the forefront of this image here and really making clear kind of what's included. What we are not getting into is a lot of the minutiae of the event or program, because you'll lose people just through too much detail in the flyer itself. So that's something we just wanted to show you.
What I also like here is that in the title of the program, Wave Warriors Surf Camp, it doesn't have to explicitly say veteran or disability or anything of the like. It sounds very enticing, or, you know, if that Wave Warriors is on a shirt, like they'll wear that souvenir t-shirt later. So that's something to think about too with your approach. If you are naming certain activities or events, that can definitely be a draw, like Julia said, if it sounds fun and exciting. And I also like in the lower right-hand corner how the different partners are recognized too. So all working together to help recruit and serve the veteran participants in the program.
Yeah, thank you. And I also find, like you say, the thinking about, do I want to wear this on a shirt is a really great tool to have. And thinking about, are you promoting your program in the right way? Is it kind of cool, exciting, something you really want to put out there yourself as, yes, I'm a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
We find very often that it can be that sometimes our population can be portrayed as victims or sad or somehow diminished in some of the communications, and that's definitely not something somebody's going to want to put out there on their shirt. So something to bear in mind. So I'm going to get into a little bit about how we communicate and some of our best practices once we've pushed out some program information. We've shared the events and program via two-way advertising, traditional media, all the different techniques we can have in our toolbox. But then what next? If a veteran does reach out to you and show interest, there's a couple of key communication strategies that we've employed successfully to ensure minimal dropout before your program, because it's something we've all had. We've lined everything up. We have a lot of volunteers ready to go, and then someone doesn't show up. There is nothing more disappointing for everyone involved. So it really comes down to communicating in the lead up to that program and thinking through what someone's challenges might be. Frequent and personal communication is something that is important, where in a regular program that somebody's paying for, you might just send them one confirmation and then that's pretty much it until maybe something a day or two before. There needs to be a little more layers than that with this type of programming, especially as many of our clients have brain injury. So they need additional tools to strategize on how to help make sure that they can remember the appointment, that it's put into the calendars and diaries correctly. Sometimes it's text, we find, is a super easy way. Not everybody wants to talk to us all the time. Calls might go unanswered, but a lot of people are very happy to answer a quick text of, hey, remember your lesson next week, and some additional steps and just prompts in your own calendar to reach out to the participants regularly. Initially, keep it, as I mentioned earlier, very simple in the promotion, and then you progressively get more detailed if needed. Maybe just include the detail that they really need to know as far as what to bring, what to expect. Too much detail might be overwhelming. Maybe they are anxious about meeting an animal. Maybe they've had limited interaction with horses before. So that it could be as basic as that, getting in the way. And so really just try and find out what somebody wants to get from the program and what may be a barrier to them getting through your door in the beginning. It could be transportation. We find that's a very common thing that somebody might not share with you, but is if you're out there some distance away from public transportation, or they have vehicle challenges, that might be something they need help with. So identifying those things early is always helpful in ensuring maximum participation at the end of the day. And then if you do have requirements, those are fine, absolutely fine, but don't overpromise and underdeliver. Make sure that nobody walks away disappointed that you couldn't achieve what they wanted to. If they're not going to get on the horse that first day out, make sure they know that. If they're expecting to be on that trail ride and off on their own day one, then they're going to be disappointed and not come back. So maybe lay out some of the progressions where appropriate. And as we alluded to earlier, with involving family members, caregivers, therapists, and case managers on the arrangements really is helpful as well in making sure people can handle their schedule and have the support they need in place to do that. And including those people as well in the experience. None of us love learning a new sport solo. Many times. So it can be really an attractive thing to have someone with you to enjoy the experience and also share a skill that can continue for a lifetime. And then just the basics, be responsive. Make sure that nobody's hanging on for a reply to their email for a week or more, because then they'll fade and lose interest and figure that you have the opportunity has since gone away. So something else to consider.
That's a good point about text messages too. If you are using that medium for communication, let them know if they're only monitored during regular business hours, because some people may be worried if you don't reply back at an off hour. So that's just something to communicate as well about what's to be expected of your responsiveness.
And maybe you can share the group text capability on Google. That's been something we've found super useful for events.
Yeah, there are a few ways that you can utilize text messages from a desktop computer, Google Voice being one, and there are other vendors as well. I think that's another topic we could open up for discussion during the Q&A at the end.
Mm-hmm. They're free and a very easy way to reach everyone who's coming to your program. So a few more communication tips to share. Using veteran-friendly language that veterans might identify with, keeping it really simple, making sure obviously you include the who, what, where, when right up front so nobody has to look for that information. We've already talked about using imagery that folks are going to respond to that looks like them. Utilizing social media as a tool that they can share with their friends and creating that fear of missing out that everybody's trying to achieve. We have other training tools through the Adapt to Achieve program to encourage your volunteers and staff to utilize, making sure they're really up to speed on how to work with those with brain injury and maybe post-traumatic stress. Those kind of trainings are important to share with your volunteers and have them do up front, because they'll really help them be prepared for when veterans come through your door and make them have the best possible experience. I also want to mention PsychArmor has a lot of really fantastic veteran-centered free online training, and each module that they offer is only 15 minutes in length. So those are really accessible and not too much of a time commitment for volunteers. So that concludes the presentation for today. We really hope that we were able to scratch the surface on some of the things we've learned through our years of programming and working with disabled veterans. It's been a fantastic experience. It's been some of the most fulfilling work we've done as an organization, and we hope we've made an important difference in some lives, and that you will be active doing the same, and maybe the information today has helped you a little bit with that, but we'd be glad to answer questions where we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you both, Julianne and Julia, for a very terrific presentation. And with that, let's open things up for questions. And again, if you have a question, simply type it into the Q&A box at the very bottom of your screen. There's a text box at the bottom where you can type your text, hit enter, or click the send button. Only our panelists will see the questions, and we'll address these verbally as time permits. And so with that, Julianne Mills, Julia Ray, and Bree Podgorski has also joined us. Let me turn things over to you for any questions we may have received so far.
Thank you. We really appreciate this opportunity and partnering with PATH International. It's a fantastic organization, and we appreciate this chance to chat with everybody today. We've received a couple of questions. The first was around whether programming was available for reservists. We consider reservists part of the military family, and just as other active duty and veteran personnel, we welcome them to our particular programming. Of course, each program determines who they'd like to target as far as their veteran and military population themselves. But we certainly, like we mentioned in the presentation, encourage as open door as possible with different people who are in the veteran space, because it'll just mean that nobody has to sort through whether or not they're eligible for a program. If there's a very all are welcome kind of feel to your program and your marketing, I think you'll find that recruitment becomes a lot easier. So that would be a tip I have to share there. We also had a question around serving veterans with injury, TBI and MS, and that they observed that these conditions might be tricky to work with and sometimes not as obvious. And we had mentioned toward the end of our presentation that there are some free training that's online available for volunteers and staff, particularly serving diagnoses such as TBI and PTS. So I definitely leverage those free online trainings that you can either Google, or so anybody is welcome to access trainings from the Disabled Sports USA website and our YouTube channel, as well as PsychArmor was another organization that I mentioned. We don't usually expect adaptive sports instructors to have a kind of clinical level of knowledge there, but that at least some basic knowledge is very useful to help the veteran have a really positive experience.
And I think I would add to, with those conditions in particular, they vary so much, they can vary over time. So really communicating with that individual is key, that they have a pulse on, what symptoms they may be experiencing, if they have the support of their doctor to be participating in the activity, and also referring to PATH resources and certification opportunities to learn more about serving these riders and what the recommendations are in terms of eligibility criteria, and if they should be doing unmounted activities or mounted, depending on their condition. And check to see what resources you may have at your center, perhaps a physical or occupational therapist that you may be able to bring in for a consult during your lessons. That was something that I was fortunate to have when I was teaching in the past, as a resource to communicate with those professionals when assessing riders that had more involved needs.
Thanks, Julianne. We had another good question about policies around the use of photographs, which I think is a really great point to talk a little bit more about. That is something that, as an organization, it's actually part of our insurance and liability waiver, where there is a permission to use photography, part of that waiver. So depending on the whether or not you have that as part of your own liability waiver, it should be somewhere that you do ask people permission to use their imagery, and that they should have the chance to agree to that or disagree. I think a knock-on impact of that is when volunteers and staff, and especially with the ease of posting things on social media, it's an important conversation to have with everybody involved in the program, especially if there is somebody who would rather not have their imagery shared, and giving volunteers some food for thought about how they are depicting their involvement in the program and the participants in the program as well, and talking about, again, how people may not want to be victimized or pitied, and keeping everything very positive, and also keeping anonymity where appropriate as well. So just making sure permissions are granted there. A tool that we have found helpful is sometimes if you've got a program where there are people who want to opt out of the photography, is using a colored wristband system to identify people who'd rather not have the picture taken. Then if you are going through photos later, it's an easy way to pick those individuals out and make sure those photos are deleted in your book. So hopefully that helps a little bit. We had a question around grants, and Disabled Sports USA does have a grants program for its chapter network. I'm not as familiar with Path International about grants that are available to its members or what the recommendation is there, so maybe someone from their team could chime in on that. And not finally, I think this is a top tip, which I wanted to share from a listener, which she says, the use of the 24-hour clock language is this more important for recent veterans who may be reintegrating into society, and not so much for older veterans who may have adapted to civilian reference to time. Perhaps years out of service impacts programming. I think that's a good thing to think about. We haven't observed that as necessarily being a strong difference. I think veterans, no matter whether they've been in or out, can go back and forth pretty easily, but that might indicate a very military friendly use of language. So it's just something to consider.
Yeah, Bree, do you have anything to add on that? I think, don't you keep your watch on military time?
Yeah, I taught myself after getting this job, actually, because I did find that it was easier and more friendly to the veterans to use time that they're more familiar with. And I think that even after they have kind of transitioned out, they still use the 24-hour clock. It's just sort of ingrained in them.
Great. Good to know.
You want to talk about individual grants at all, the warfighter individual grants?
Yeah, there are some grants available if you have veterans who want to access adaptive equipment. There are a few organizations out there that have some programs that can help them, so it's useful to know about the VA Adaptive Sports Equipment program. That there is a way for them to access adaptive sports equipment through the VA, but it does have some limitations in terms of types of equipment. Challenge Athletes Foundation is another great resource for your veterans, and the Warfighter Sports Program does have some grants that we make available in a little bit more of a limited way. So those are some resources, and of course, Wounded Warrior Project is another large organization that can sometimes help in those areas as well. It's worth connecting with as another partner that might be another source for feeding veterans into your program that I forgot to mention during the presentation, but wanted to mention now.